Welcome to U.S. History. This is a two-part class. We're going to cover everything from colonization all the way to present day with Barack Obama. So you have a long time span ahead of you. This course is going to try to narrow down to give you a strong base and a strong understanding of your heritage as an American and the events that shaped this country. This is a high school history class, so this is not meant to be comprehensive. It's definitely meant to make it so that you know the things that you should know as a high school student, so that when you are faced with situations about what does it mean to be an American and what is the Constitution and what was our role in World War II, you have a general understanding and can carry on a conversation, but not that you know every single battle of World War II. So use this course as a springboard. If there's something you find interesting, definitely use that as an opportunity to explore and figure out what parts of American history really interest you. It may be the 1920s, it may be the Cold War. But this class is going to definitely be a generalization. With that being said, there is an end of course exam to help you past that. We're going to definitely focus our attention on the information that will be on that exam, because that exam will test and make sure that you have a firm understanding. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started on the first lesson in early U.S. history. We want to remember where we came from, and that, of course, is we want to look at this in terms of regions, because you're going to have the New England region, the middle region, and then the southern region. And we divide it up that way because these areas developed in a similar manner. The New England colonies are going to be more influenced by religion than, say, the southern colonies. Of course, just climate. The New England colonies are going to have a similar climate, which is going to be much different than the southern colonies. So you want to be able to identify the differences between these different regions. And we're going to look at the specific things that we want to identify for this lesson. For this lesson, you should be able to identify the religion, social, political, and economic similarities and differences between the New England colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies. And colonies down on the bottom, all that means is that I want you to tell me what colonies were in New England. So you need to know that Massachusetts is in New England and not in the southern region. So by the end of this lesson, hopefully you'll be able to fill out this chart. So here is a map of the 13 original colonies. And if we were to divide this up into those regions, you're going to have New England, which is going to be Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. So the colonies up at the top. For the middle colonies, you're going to have New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. And then, of course, the great southern colonies. And I can say that because I was born and raised in South Carolina, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. So you do need to be able to label at least the 13 colonies. So if you can't label all your states, definitely be able to label these 13. For this lesson, we're going to start at the top and work our way down, filling out that chart. And we're going to start off looking at religion. Now, religion was a factor for coming to the New World. They came to the New World because they were being persecuted for their religion, or they wanted to separate themselves from a religion, or just make a stand and develop their own in the New World. Not everybody came for religious reasons, and that's important to note. The New England colonies are going to be your most religious colonies, and then as you work your way down, the reasons for their development are going to become more economic. So For example, the Puritans, which are going to be your main settlers in New England, were extremely religious. Whereas if you get down to Georgia, Georgia was established as a penal colony, a colony for convicts. So you've got this scale, and that might help you remember. So let's look at the religion in the New England colonies. Of course, you probably remember the Puritans, and they were the group of English Protestants in the 16th and 17th century. They're going to be the ones who settled Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay. And they were founded for religious purposes. They were definitely fed up with the ceremonies of the Church of England, and the Puritans and the Pilgrims, who were also in this area, they sought to recreate society in the manner that they believed that God truly intended for the church to be. So Puritans and Pilgrims are Protestant, but they're separating and trying to get away from the true Church of England. So they are escaping the religious persecution that's going on in England. However, when we look at this group and we look at New England, they're not very tolerant to people who don't agree with them. So it's kind of funny that they were running away from England to escape religious persecution, but were not very tolerant, or were not tolerant themselves at all. You probably remember the Pilgrims in that group. They were the ones who had to deal with Squanto, and they established the first Thanksgiving. Again, when you think of the New England colonies, you can definitely think of them as being a religious colony, but think of them as not being very tolerant. You must be Puritan. You must follow the rules that they set out. So they were actually, if you were a Catholic living in England and you decided you wanted to have religious freedom, you wouldn't go to New England, right? You would go to the middle colonies or the southern colonies because they would be more tolerant towards Catholics. Puritans, if you didn't agree with something in their church, or weren't Protestant, then they very well may exile you and send you out, such as they did with Roger Williams. Roger Williams was sent out, and he founded the Rhode Island colony. And of course, you can think of Anne Hutchinson in the Salem witch trials. So definitely understand that they came for religious reasons, but they weren't very tolerant of others. So now we're going to move on to another box on our chart, which is going to be the economics of the New England area. It's going to be cold, so they don't have a very long growing season. Of course, you can think of New York. If you've ever been to New York in the winter, it seems it's unbearable. A lot of people, of course, up north move south when they get older because of the cold winters. Of course, that hasn't changed. So they don't have a long growing season. They also don't have the soil. It's thin, it's rocky. Think about when the original Pilgrims came over. Remember, they had a hard time farming and couldn't figure out how to do it, so they had to go to the Indians to get them to help them. So they're going to turn to instead commerce, shipbuilding, fishing, things that don't have to do with growing, really. And this is a picture of the Plymouth colony. Down here, here's Massachusetts Bay, and here's Rhode Island. If you've ever been up into the New England area, it probably makes a little bit more sense. What was the society like in New England? They had a strong sense of community, again, because it grew out of that church tradition. They didn't have large farms, so everybody lived in town and in small towns and small cities. They're going to develop what's called an egalitarian society. Definitely highlight and make sure you remember that as a vocabulary word. If you were a member of the church, which everybody was in New England, you were seen as equal. And this is going to be important because this will translate over into our democratic system, right? So they'd have these town meetings and all the men in the church could vote, and it wasn't like the shoemaker had more say than, say, everybody was equal within the church because everyone's equal in the eyes of God, sort of thing. The New England colonies had a heavy influence because they also were the ones that formed the Mayflower Compact. When the Puritans came over on the Mayflower, of course, they were headed for below Jamestown and got blown off course. And they realized that they were not under the control of the crown here because this was not where they were supposed to be. So like they technically were without laws. And so before they stepped off the boat, they wrote down and agreed to work together and that on a set of laws that would be agreeable to everybody. And that was the Mayflower Compact. And it was instrumental in getting them through the winter and helping them to survive. So you definitely want to remember the Mayflower Compact, which came out of the New England colonies, and also this idea of a democratic sort of rule that was taking place up there. So let's move on. Let's look at the middle colonies. The middle colonies are going to be your most diverse colonies, and you can try to think of them as being the crossroads of the New World, right? They sit between the southern and New England, so a lot of traffic, is going to go through them just to get from one side to the other. If you've ever been to Pennsylvania and driven through the wheat fields of Pennsylvania, you'll realize that the middle colonies grow a lot of our agricultural products. And of course, as we've expanded, a lot of that's moved out to the west or in the Midwest. But before all of that was colonized, the middle colonies produced most of your agricultural products. They were large farms. And they produced agricultural crops, or what we call staple crops, wheat, corn, things of that nature. So what was the religion like in the middle colonies? You're going to have much more toleration towards a variety of religions. You're going to have a lot of Quakers. Quakers are pacifists, meaning that they don't want to engage in any sort of conflict. So they're not going to require you to become Quaker. They're going to be okay with you being whatever religion you are because they don't want to engage in conflict. So you're going to have Catholics and Protestants and Jews and everybody sort of living together. It's going to be an area of a lot of religious tolerance. But you also need to be aware of the plantation system. Now, the plantation system looks like this. You're going to have a very small amount of wealthy planters at the top, and they are going to be over or controlling a very large slave population. And that's the plantation system. And they saw it as absolutely necessary because they were growing massive amounts of crops that had to be planted and then picked, and then if it was cotton, the seed had to be removed before it was put into the cotton gin. There was no mechanization as if you moved up north, they would have machines and factories, and they may not need the massive amount of labor that they did in the South. So the South is going to develop a society that's what's called hierarchical. Hierarchical means that everybody knew their place. You were a plantation owner, and you may only mingle with plantation owners, and slaves definitely only mingled with slaves, and then these people in the middle definitely knew that they were in the artisans guild, and then you knew who the poor whites were, and then you had a very small portion of free blacks. So you are going to need to be able to identify all the regions and then the different things that make up the different regions. So for example, if you were to fill out a chart on the different regions and you were to list the economic activity of those regions, it might look something like this. So the goal of this lesson is to be able to describe each area and the things that were occurring and how the areas developed differently based on region. Here are the sources that I used for this lesson, so if you want to explore more in depth the different colonial regions, you can.